For anyone who is not aware, Pinyon Jay populations have declined drastically over the past half century, and little information is known as to why. This is largely because the species is understudied and their behavior makes them difficult to study with standard methods. This spring, GBBO partnered with the Bureau of Land Management and Arizona Game and Fish Department to conduct species-specific surveys in northern and central Arizona. I know we've talked about pinyon jays a lot in previous webinars, but if anyone is unfamiliar, pinyon jays are mostly found in the southern Great Basin and the southwestern United States. Their distribution largely overlaps with pinyon pines, though they can be found in smaller numbers outside of this range. They are highly social, forming large flocks in the hundreds, which travel together through large home ranges on a daily basis. They utilize a variety of habitats within this home range for different activities such as foraging, caching, and nesting. As I mentioned, they are typically associated with pinyon juniper woodlands, but often use surrounding habitat for caching and utilize other coniferous forests to a smaller degree. While this species has declined, management of pinyon juniper woodlands has increased, typically in the form of woodland removal. So it's vital for us to gain a better understanding of this species habitat relationship. The goals of this project were pretty general, as we were trying to gather information on general use across a large landscape. One of our objectives was to determine presence of pinyon jays in high priority treatment areas that had either recently occurred or were set to occur in the following year. Simultaneously, we focused the same amount of effort in randomly selected plots across the landscape. This data would provide information on occurrence and habitat use. A big part of this effort was actually to test protocols and lay a framework for an ongoing monitoring program. Early this spring, about a year after publishing the Pinyon Jay Conservation Strategy, the Pinyon Jay Working Group put out recommendations for Pinyon Jay specific studies. As I mentioned earlier, Pinyon Jay populations are difficult to study with traditional methods like point counts due to their flocking behavior and daily movements across large home ranges. The document provides general guidelines which can be tailored to specific projects, but aims to standardize practices so there is compatibility across projects. This will allow for a large enough sample size to provide a better understanding of the complex needs of this species. One of the fundamental elements is to create data standards to be sure everyone is collecting the same basic information. Sampling units were 2.5 kilometer square plots, which were systematically searched for pinyon jay presence using an area search approach. The exact route a surveyor took was dependent upon habitat and topography, with the constraint that they must get within 1 kilometer of every point within the plot. We strove for at least a half kilometer just to get better coverage. There was no set time limit, but we estimated surveys should take 3 to 5 hours. Each plot was visited up to 3 times before pinyon jays could be considered absent from the plot. This is an example of an actual survey route this season. Surveyors can utilize features such as roads or cow trails to move efficiently through the plot. Open areas can be largely surveyed from the perimeter, but they may need to spend extra time in densely wooded areas. Treatment plots were selected by overlaying these 2.5 kilometer grids with identified treatment areas and then randomly selecting 30 to be surveyed this season. Regional landscape plots were randomly selected within 25 miles of treatment plots. Areas where pinyon jays were not expected to occur based on the Arizona Breeding Bird Atlas were removed from consideration, so we didn't spend time surveying in just straight grasslands, for example. These regional plots were not considered control plots, but just expanded our coverage area. The only reason they were constrained to 25 miles from treatment areas is just for logistical reasons and travel. So the first field season went pretty well. It ran from March 1st through May 31st, which coincides with the pinyon jay breeding season. This was a relatively small project, and we had 3 full-time surveyors, and we had some supplemental surveys done by GBBO staff. We did have our fair share of weather delays because it tends to be very cold in the Arizona Strip in early March. I think Kayla and I went out and did some training, and it was in the single digits for camping, which is a little bit of a shock to us after having not camped in that sort of weather in a long time. But surveys were really fun. We visited some really cool areas. The plots did require 10 kilometers of walking at minimum, so it was long days that were exhausting, but it was worthwhile. There were a lot of other cool birds, as you can see this painted red start that Ned took. All data was collected using tablets and Esri's Field Maps application. This allowed for surveyors to mark exactly on the landscape where they saw the birds. We did either polygons, like this one highlighted in the bluish, which was, it would represent sort of where a larger flock was. And then we also did point locations in case the birds were only in one place. And for each of these, surveyors had to record all kinds of informations on the birds, like flock size, what their general activities were, and of course comments, which were immensely helpful. Here's a quick results summary for some of the work this past season. We haven't delved too much into the data yet, but there were 74 total plots surveyed. This is 14 more than we anticipated because a lot of the treatment plots had Pinyon Jay presence in the very first visit, so they didn't require 3 visits. The regional treatment or the regional landscape plots we did visit 3 times no matter what. That's just to be able to get some extra information. So we confirmed presence in 59 total plots. It's 21 of the 32 regional plots and 38 of the 42 treatment plots. You can see on the right we have 2 treatment plot areas, and you can see the plots with some of the Pinyon Jay sightings in blue and purple. And then on the bottom left, these are some of the regional landscape plots. The ones, a lot of them had Pinyon Jay sightings in orange, and then there were a few you can see here in blue that didn't have any sightings. We did not consider flyovers as Pinyon Jays being present in the plot, but they were still recorded. Here's a close-up view of a regional landscape plot from this season. You can see the surveyors marked point locations and polygon locations with the associated behavior of a majority of the flock. In addition to confirming presence, this adds a spatial component to the data that can later be compared to known habitat areas. On the left, you can see some habitat delineations based on a landfire vegetation map. Without going into detail, the green indicates woodlands while the yellowish areas are sagebrush and grasslands, and you can see how the birds are utilizing both. The data collected indicates where various behaviors are occurring and can be used for future analysis.